I'm Dulce Whitford, 28 years old. 2 decades of my life. My parents labeled me the incompetent one while Miranda racked up Ivy League credentials and secured her place in the family fortune. They ridiculed my dyslexia around the table, shut me out of important conversations, and compensated me pennies compared to her earnings. Then, during Miranda's graduation celebration at the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by 350 attendees, someone I'd never met approached me with an envelope that would unravel every deception my parents had constructed around me. They had no idea Grandma had been paying attention. She witnessed it all. And what she left behind would turn the Whitford empire completely on its head. The Whitfords represented generational wealth in Manhattan, the type of dynasty whose legacy adorned wings of medical centers and cultural institutions. Gerald Whitford, my father, controlled Whitford Properties, a commercial development powerhouse my grandmother Ella Laner had created starting with just one modest Brooklyn location back in 1965. Fast forward to 2024, the organization commanded a $92 million valuation. My dyslexia diagnosis came when I turned 7. Words on paper would shift and scramble, transforming straightforward text into challenges that consumed triple the time other children needed.
How did my parents react?
Not with encouragement, but with embarrassment. At 12 years old, they arranged private instructors for Miranda, violin training at Juilliard, complete French language immersion, college entrance coaching from a Princeton alumnus billing $400 hourly. When I mentioned needing reading assistance, my mother Priscilla simply exhaled heavily. Dulce, we've already invested considerably in specialists. Eventually, we must acknowledge that certain children simply lack academic aptitude. I was 12. I accepted her words as truth. So, I figured things out independently. Audiobooks saved me. I created my own method using visual representations, sketches, and structured charts that allowed me to understand material in ways conventional reading couldn't achieve. Every Sunday afternoon, I'd ride the train to Grandma Ella Laner's Upper West Side residence, where she'd spend hours with me, teaching through narratives rather than textbooks. "Dooley," she once said, her aged hand resting on mine, "you process words more slowly than others, but you perceive details they overlook. That's not a limitation, sweetheart. That's a unique perspective." I couldn't grasp her meaning completely. Eventually, I would, but first I needed to endure another 19 years as the Whitford family's shameful secret. Christmas, 2018. 20 family members assembled around the mahogany surface in my parents' Upper East Side residence. Crystal lighting fixtures, professionally prepared meal, the yearly exhibition of Whitford family excellence. My father positioned himself at the table's head, wine glass elevated. "I have something to share," he announced, projecting that corporate authority he carried like armor. "Miranda has gained admission to Harvard Law School. Complete scholarship." Celebration erupted. Applause filled the room. Miranda displayed rehearsed humility. "My elder daughter," Gerald pressed on, radiating pride, "will become the first Whitford attending Harvard in 3 generations. She's destined to elevate this family and this organization to remarkable levels." Additional applause. Uncle Richard congratulated Miranda physically. Aunt Catherine touched her napkin to her eyes. Then my father's attention moved along the table.
Toward me.
"And Dulce," he stopped. The affection in his tone disappeared. "Well, Dulce is present as well." Several relatives chuckled. Gentle, awkward laughter, the variety people produce when uncertainty strikes. Miranda didn't stand up for me. She joined their amusement. I focused on my dish. The lamb became indistinct through tears I refused to release. Beneath the table, someone's hand discovered mine. Delicate fingers, tissue-thin skin. Grandma Eleanor, positioned opposite me, pressed gently. When our eyes met, hers contained something intense, something resembling rage aimed at her own son. She remained silent. Not during that moment. But 3 months afterward, she summoned me to her residence, explaining she had something crucial to reveal. I couldn't have known then, but that Christmas gathering, that instance of casual brutality before 20 observers, had initiated something something requiring 5 years to explode. Following my state university graduation in 2022, never a prestigious institution, I requested a role at Whitford Properties. I wanted to demonstrate my capability, that the family enterprise could represent my future too. My father consented to employ me as an administrative assistant. Compensation: $42,000 annually. That identical month, Miranda entered as chief legal counsel. Her compensation: $280,000 plus performance bonuses. My responsibilities involved duplicating paperwork, reserving meeting spaces, and retrieving coffee for managers who never remembered my identity. I received 0 meeting invitations, never viewed a single agreement. But I observed and absorbed everything. I uncovered something about myself throughout those extended hours in the duplication area. I could identify connections others overlooked. When managers discussed transactions in corridors, I'd create diagrams mapping the associations between entities, monetary movement, possible complications. An ability I'd cultivated to offset my reading challenges had transformed into something entirely different. Grandma Eleanor had instilled this in me. During those Sunday afternoons at her residence, she'd display aged agreements from the organization's beginning and demonstrate how to interpret them, not line by line, but as frameworks, as architectures. "Your father examines contracts like an attorney," she mentioned once in 2019, shortly before her health deteriorated. "He searches for advantages. You examine them like a designer. You recognize how everything interconnects." That same afternoon, she'd given me a compact wooden container, mahogany, featuring brass fixtures. "Protect this," she'd instructed. "Don't access it now. When circumstances require it, you'll understand." I'd brought the container home, secured it in my closet, and attempted to dismiss the peculiar significance of her statement. March 2019. Grandma Eleanor's residence. She was 82 then, her previously energetic build grown frail, her silver strands wispy against her armchair cushion, but her eyes, those penetrating perceptive eyes, remained completely alert. "Take a seat, Dooley." I positioned myself opposite her in the space where I'd experienced countless Sunday afternoons. The surfaces displayed photographs. Eleanor initiating construction on her inaugural Brooklyn development in 1965. Eleanor meeting with Mayor Koch. Eleanor receiving a businesswoman's recognition in 1987. 0 images of my father leading. "I constructed Whitford Properties from absolute nothing," she stated, her voice carrying generations of strength. "1 location, 1 assistant, 60 years of dedication. Your father." She stopped, and something resentful crossed her expression. "Your father received it as inheritance. He didn't construct it. He lacks understanding of what creating something means." "Grandma." "He evaluates people through their qualifications, their academic achievements, their capacity to perform in corporate settings." She leaned toward me. "I evaluate people through how they treat those powerless to resist. And you, Dulce, you're the sole person in this family who understands kindness." She pushed the wooden container into my grasp. "There's something contained here that could assist you eventually, but the moment hasn't arrived. You're unprepared currently, and Gerald isn't either." Her grip intensified. "When circumstances arrive, when he reveals his true character to you, you'll understand your action." I wanted to inquire what she intended, what lay inside, why she'd selected me, but she shifted topics, began discussing weather, her garden, her current reading material. 18 months following, she passed. Pancreatic cancer. I clasped her hand in hospice, the sole family member present. The container remained unopened in my closet. April 2024. The electronic message arrived Tuesday afternoon. Subject designation: Position Restructuring Confidential. Dear Ms. Whitford, as part of our continuing organizational optimization, your present position will be terminated. Effective July 1st, 2024. HR will contact you regarding severance arrangements. I reviewed it 3 attempts. The characters floated, reorganized, resolved back into identical, devastating communication. They were terminating me. That evening, I remained late arranging documents nobody would examine. Through the narrow partitions separating my workspace from my father's premium office, I detected voices. Gerald and Priscilla. Can't maintain her presence when Miranda assumes control, my father was explaining. It appears problematic. The CEO's sibling functioning as a secretary. People will raise concerns. What concerns? My mother asked. Why she lacks leadership position. Why we haven't advanced her. A silence. Why she possesses her characteristics. My mother's answer arrived gentle, nearly compassionate. We've provided everything possible for her, Gerald. Certain children simply lack necessary qualities. Precisely. Therefore she must depart. We'll provide generous severance. She can locate something different. Something matching her capabilities. I press my hand against the partition. $42,000 yearly. My studio residence in Queens shared with 2 individuals cost $1,800 monthly. Zero savings, zero protection. Losing this employment meant homelessness within 8 weeks. But financial concerns weren't what constricted my chest. It was the understanding settling into my core like ice. If I permitted this, if I embraced their characterization of my identity, I would experience my remaining existence as the family disappointment. Not because I genuinely failed, but because I never received opportunity for success. Miranda's graduation celebration was tomorrow. I questioned what additional declarations my father had arranged. May 15, 2024. The Plaza Hotel, Grand Ballroom. 350 attendees occupied the ornate space. Business associates, investors, attorneys from elite practices, extended relatives I scarcely recognized. Crystal lighting cast rainbow illumination across silk coverings. A 12-member orchestra performed Gershwin in the corner. This represented Gerald Whitford's domain, his platform, the venue where he executed his character as patriarch, as magnate, as someone possessing everything. I positioned myself in the entrance, adjusting my dress hem, black, basic, $79 from Zara, my salary's maximum allowance. Everyone else sparkled in luxury garments and fitted formal wear. My mother intercepted me before seating. Dulce. Priscilla's examination traveled from my budget cosmetics to my worn footwear, her mouth forming a narrow expression. You couldn't locate anything superior? This is my available option. Well, she adjusted her Cartier bracelet. You'll occupy table 27 near the service access. Attempt avoiding attention. Understood. And Dulce. She approached closer, her Chanel No. 5 overpowering. Tonight belongs to Miranda. Whatever emotions you're experiencing, whatever bitterness you believe you've earned, suppress it. Don't humiliate us. She departed before my response. Table 27 occupied the ballroom's rear, partially concealed behind a column. My companions were remote cousins I'd encountered perhaps twice. From my position, I could observe the primary platform, the enormous portrait of Miranda in her Harvard attire, the sign reading, "Congratulations, Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law Class of 2024. And near the entrance, positioned alone beside the doorway, a silver-haired gentleman in a gray suit. He wasn't socializing, wasn't consuming food, just observing. His eyes located mine across the populated space. Something frigid traveled down my spine. At 8:30 p.m., the orchestra ceased. The illumination reduced. A spotlight highlighted the platform where my father stood, champagne vessel elevated. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciation for attending tonight to honor an exceptional young woman. The applause commenced before his sentence concluded. Miranda graduated top 5% of her Harvard Law class. She fulfilled a clerkship with Justice Reynolds. And last month, she achieved partner trajectory at Sullivan and Cromwell in unprecedented time. Gerald's voice expanded with pride. But tonight, I'm not merely honoring her accomplishments. I'm declaring her destiny. Miranda accompanied him on platform, luminous in emerald Valentino. Effective immediately, Miranda Whitford will receive my complete estate upon my death. This encompasses our family residence at 740 Park Avenue, presently assessed at $13 million, a Tesla Model S Plaid. And most significantly, he stopped for emphasis, the CEO position of Whitford Properties when I retire. The space erupted. Standing recognition, camera illumination. Miranda touched her eyes with calculated elegance. 350 people celebrating, and 0 individuals glanced at table 27. The cousin adjacent to me, a woman I'd encountered at a funeral 8 years prior, leaned toward me. Duly correct? So, what does this signify for you? I opened my mouth, closed it. What could I articulate? That I'd just been officially eliminated from my own family? That the termination notification in my inbox was merely the introduction? That every anxiety I'd possessed about being valueless had just been validated before everyone significant? The applause diminished. Miranda embraced her father. Cameras captured, and through the gathering, the silver-haired gentleman at the doorway began advancing toward me. Deliberately, methodically, like he'd anticipated this precise instant. The gentleman stopped at my table. Up close, I could determine he was more aged than initially assessed, early 60s, with profound eyes and the calculated bearing of someone who experienced his career in legal chambers. Miss Whitford. That's correct. I straightened in my position. May I assist you? My identification is Jonathan Ellis. He extracted a business card from his coat pocket. Cream-colored, embossed. Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I represented your grandmother's legal matters. My grandmother. The statement struck like impact. Eleanor died 3 years ago.
I'm cognizant.
He didn't sit. Didn't soften. She left something designated for you, with explicit directions about delivery timing. From within his jacket, he presented a cream envelope, substantial material, fastened with red wax displaying a notary impression. What is this? Her will. The authentic one. His voice lowered. The version your father lacks awareness exists. I stared at the envelope. The notary impression read Morrison and Blake, September 12, 2019. 5 months following that Sunday afternoon in her residence. 5 months following she'd handed me the wooden container. I don't comprehend. Your grandmother provided me precise directions. I was to present this documentation on the day your father publicly removed your inheritance. Ellis glanced toward the platform where Gerald and Miranda still basked in recognition. I believe that just transpired. My hands shook as I accepted the envelope. Mr. Ellis, what's contained here? For the initial time, something nearly resembling warmth appeared in his eyes. Mrs. Eleanor instructed me to communicate. Deliver this to Dulce on the day Gerald demonstrates to her his precise character. By then, she'll be prepared. He straightened his neckwear. I'll be accessible when you have inquiries. You possess my card. Then he rotated and departed, vanishing into the gathering. I couldn't respire in that ballroom. I pushed through the service access, discovered a vacant corridor near the kitchen. Fluorescent illumination buzzed overhead. The celebration sounds muffled to a remote hum. My fingers trembled as I fractured the wax fastening. Inside, 3 pages of concentrated legal text.
Unnoticed de signature.
A date, September 12, 2019. I read deliberately, meticulously. The characters floated, but I forced them into clarity. I, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound cognition and physical state, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documentation and declare this to be my final will and testament. My eyes caught on a section near the center. To my granddaughter, Dulce and Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, presently assessed at approximately $47 million, along with all voting authority associated therewith. I read it repeatedly. 51%. Controlling interest. The will proceeded. This bequest is executed with complete knowledge of my son Gerald's conduct toward Dulce. She has been excluded, minimized, and refused opportunity, not attributable to capability deficiency, but attributable to support deficiency. Dooley is not slow. Dooley was neglected, and I will not permit her father's bias to persist following my death. A sob trapped in my throat. Grandma had witnessed. She'd witnessed everything. Condition: to activate this bequest, Duly must formally demand an emergency board assembly within 72 hours of receiving this documentation. Failure to proceed within this period will render this will invalid, and all assets shall transfer per my 2015 testament. 72 hours. The deadline would occur at 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. I rested against the frigid wall, the documentation pressed to my chest. My grandmother had provided me a weapon. Now I needed to determine if I possessed sufficient courage to utilize it. Jonathan Ellis was positioned by the coat verification when I emerged. You reviewed it. The 72-hour clause. My voice fractured. Why would she incorporate that? Your grandmother understood you, Miss Whitford. He handed me a secondary card, this one with a personal cellular number handwritten on the reverse. She understood that if she provided you unlimited duration, you might persuade yourself against action. The deadline isn't a punishment. It's authorization, permission to cease waiting for your family to reconsider their judgment about you, to claim what legitimately belongs to you. He examined his watch. The deadline is 8:30 p.m. May 18th, 3 days. If you choose to move forward, you'll need to file a formal demand for an emergency board assembly. I can assist you in composing it. Through the ballroom entrance, I could observe my father still on platform posing for photographs with Miranda. My mother moved among attendees, receiving congratulations as though she'd personally achieved them. If I proceeded with this, if I activated the will, I would obliterate every remaining relationship I possessed. My parents would never pardon me. Miranda would interpret it as treachery. But if I remained quiet, I would embrace their judgment. I would transform into precisely what they'd perpetually claimed I was: the disappointment, the incompetent one, the daughter who held no significance. Miss Whitford. Ellis's voice penetrated my spiral. Your grandmother had faith in you. She invested the final 3 years of her existence preparing for this instant. The question is, do you have faith in yourself? I examined the will in my grasp, at the refined signature of the woman who'd clasped my hand beneath Christmas tables and instructed me to interpret contracts like structures. I'll contact you tomorrow, I stated. We're demanding that board assembly. Ellis permitted himself a modest smile. She predicted you would. I'm going to stop here for just a moment. If you've ever been undervalued by the people who are meant to support you, if you comprehend what it feels like to be rejected, I want you to comment the word enough below. Let me know I'm not isolated in this. And if you want to witness what transpired when I entered that boardroom, keep watching because we're just beginning. Now back to the story. That night, back in my confined Queens residence, I finally accessed the wooden container. My roommates were unconscious. The sole illumination came from the street lamp outside my window, projecting orange stripes across my bed, where I positioned myself cross-legged, the mahogany container in my lap. The brass fixtures groaned as I elevated the cover. Inside, a handwritten correspondence on Eleanor's personal letterhead, a faded documentation with a 1965 date impression, and a USB drive, refined and contemporary, clearly inserted much afterward. I reached for the correspondence first. My dearest Dulce, if you're reviewing this, then Jonathan has executed his responsibility, and your father has performed precisely what I feared he would. I'm regretful I couldn't shield you while I was living, but I can shield you now. The enclosed documentation is the original partnership contract from 1965, when I established Whitford Properties with 2 colleagues who have long since deceased. Your father has never observed it. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting authority that cannot be reduced or transferred without board authorization. The USB contains something different, something your father hoped I'd forgotten. In 2018, Gerald suggested a resolution to decrease my voting authority from 51% to 10%. His declared reason: I was too aged to comprehend modern business. The authentic reason: he wanted dominance and I was obstructing him. The board dismissed his suggestion by 2 votes. I was one of those votes. I never forgot what he attempted to accomplish. And I never pardoned him for the method he treated you to validate it, as though diminishing you somehow demonstrated I was unsuitable. Use this intelligently, Dulce. Not for vengeance, for justice. All my affection, Grandma Ella Laner. I connected the USB into my laptop. The file was designated Board Meeting Minutes, March 2018. PDF. My father's attempt to strip his own mother of authority. Documented, time-stamped, evidence. May 16, 9:01 a.m. Margaret Coleman answered on the second ring. Julie Whitford. Her voice carried the rasp of someone who'd smoked for generations and laughed even longer. I've been wondering when you'd contact me. You know who I am. Sweetheart, your grandmother and I constructed half of Brooklyn together in the 70s. She discussed you constantly. A silence. She also informed me about the will 3 years ago, right before she passed. I gripped my phone firmer. Then you know what I'm about to execute. I know what you're contemplating executing. There's a distinction. Margaret's tone transformed. Sharper now, more business-oriented. You want to demand an emergency board assembly? That requires 3 board members to authorize the petition. I'm one. You'll need 2 additional. Can you assist me in locating them? I can accomplish better than that. I heard papers shuffling in the background. Gerald Whitford isn't as well regarded as he believes. His management approach is, let's designate it, authoritarian. At least 4 board members have articulated concerns privately. They just need someone to initiate. Hope ignited in my chest. Who? Richard Holloway. Susan Park. She corrected herself. Susan Parker. They've both been on the receiving end of Gerald's temperament in closed sessions. I'll make some contacts. Another silence. Julie, I need you to comprehend something. This isn't going to be agreeable. Your father will resist. Your sister will resist. They'll articulate terrible things. They've been articulating terrible things my whole existence. At least now I get to react. Margaret laughed, a warm, genuine sound. Ella Laner perpetually said you had steel under all that quietness. I'm starting to perceive what she intended. She cleared her throat. I'll have the petition prepared by tonight. Board Assembly demand May 18th, 10 a.m., Whitford Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're positioned in that boardroom. May 17th, Gerald discovered about the board assembly at 4 p.m. I know this because Miranda contacted me 45 minutes afterward, her voice rigid with controlled fury. What did you execute? I was positioned in my cubicle at Whitford Properties pretending to organize documents. I don't know what you're referencing. Dad just received a notice from the board secretary. Emergency assembly tomorrow. Demanded by Margaret Coleman and 2 other directors. A silence, sharp as fractured glass. Margaret Coleman hasn't demanded anything in 15 years. What did you execute? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Don't play games with me, Julie. Miranda's composure fractured. If you're attempting to humiliate us, attempting to create some kind of spectacle. I'm just executing my responsibilities, Miranda. Same as perpetually. She disconnected without articulating goodbye. 20 minutes afterward, Gerald stormed past my cubicle on his route to his office. He didn't examine me, didn't acknowledge I existed, just slammed his door hard enough to vibrate the windows. Through the wall, I heard him on the phone. Ridiculous waste of duration. Margaret's probably going senile. We'll address her concerns and proceed. No, I'm not worried. Julie? My God, Miranda, she can barely review a spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. I smiled. For the initial time in 28 years, being undervalued felt like an advantage. That night in my residence, I prepared. Printed 3 copies of the will. Downloaded the 2018 board minutes onto my phone as backup. Wrote a brief declaration, not an accusation, just a presentation of facts. Jonathan Ellis confirmed he'd attend as the authenticating attorney. Margaret texted at 11 p.m., petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept, but for once, it wasn't anxiety keeping me conscious. It was anticipation. May 18th, 2024, 9:45 a.m. Whitford Tower. The elevator opened onto the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble, the kind of corporate extravagance designed to intimidate. I stepped out in a borrowed gray blazer, my roommate's, 2 sizes too large, carrying a leather portfolio I'd purchased at Goodwill for $12. The security guard at the boardroom entrance elevated his hand. Name? Dooley Whitford. He examined his tablet, frowned. You're not on the authorized attendee roster. I'm a Whitford Properties employee and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted assembly. I can't permit you. Is there a complication? Miranda's voice behind me. I rotated. She looked immaculate. Navy power suit, Hermes scarf, the uniform of someone who belonged in boardrooms. Dooley? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. What are you executing here? I have information to present to the board. Information? Miranda laughed, a sharp performative sound. About what? You function in the copy room. The nature of my presentation is confidential. You don't even know what ROI represents. Return on investment. It's not that complicated. Miranda's smile flickered. Before she could react, our father appeared at the corridor's end flanked by two senior executives. What's transpiring here? Dulce wants to attend the board assembly. Miranda said. I was just explaining that's not feasible. Gerald examined me the method he perpetually did, like I was a stain he couldn't quite eliminate. Dulce, return to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom. It does. Margaret Coleman appeared in the entrance. 72 years old, silver-haired, standing with the quiet authority of someone who'd been constructing empires when Gerald was still in diapers. I invited her. She is standing to address the board. Margaret smiled. Let her in. Gerald's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might physically obstruct the entrance, but Margaret Coleman had been a board member for 32 years. Her authority in that space exceeded his.
Fine.
My father's voice was ice. Let her articulate. We'll observe how long it takes before she humiliates herself. The boardroom was smaller than I'd imagined. An oval table of polished walnut. 12 leather chairs. Portraits of past executives on the walls, including, I noticed, my grandmother Eleanor, her painted eyes seeming to observe from above the fireplace. 12 board members took their positions. Gerald at the head. Miranda to his right, not officially a board member yet, but positioned as heir apparent. I was directed to a chair at the far end, the children's table of corporate governance. In the corner, Jonathan Ellis positioned himself with his briefcase. He caught my eye, nodded once. Robert Hartley, the board chairman, a distinguished man in his mid-60s who'd known my grandmother for decades, called the assembly to order. This emergency session was demanded by Margaret Coleman, Richard Holloway, and Susan Parker. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret rose. Thank you, Robert. I'll keep my remarks brief. She gestured toward me. The matter I wish to address concerns a documentation that has recently emerged, a documentation that affects the ownership structure of this organization. I yield my duration to Miss Dooley Whitford. All eyes rotated to me. Miranda smirked. Gerald reclined in his chair with theatrical boredom. I stood. My hands were steadier than I anticipated. Thank you, Mrs. Coleman. And thank you to the board for permitting me to articulate. I open my portfolio. What I'm about to present may arrive as a surprise to some of you. I request only that you listen to the evidence before reaching any conclusions. Gerald sighed audibly. I ignored him. Before I could proceed, my father elevated his hand. I'm regretful, Robert, but before we waste the board's valuable duration, Gerald stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. I need to provide some context. Gerald, Margaret started. Dulce is my daughter. His voice carried that patronizing warmth he used for difficult clients. And I love her, but she's not qualified to address this board on any business matter. She functions in an administrative role. She has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience. Miranda chimed in, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Dooley also has dyslexia. She struggles with reviewing. We've attempted to support her, but she shrugged elegantly. Some limitations can't be overcome with effort alone. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. What we're observing here, Gerald proceeded, is a troubled young woman acting out, perhaps due to the announcement at Miranda's graduation celebration. Sibling jealousy is Mr. Whitford. Robert Hartley's voice cut through like a gavel. You'll have an opportunity to react, but Miss Whitford demanded this duration, and she's entitled to utilize it. Gerald positioned himself. His expression promised consequences. Miranda caught my eye and mouthed, "You're humiliating yourself." I examined them both, my father, my sister, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Something colder, clearer. They weren't attempting to shield me. They weren't even attempting to shield the organization. They were attempting to shield their version of the narrative, the version where I was nothing. "Thank you, Mr. Hartley." I pulled the documentation from my portfolio. "I won't be discussing my reviewing ability today. I'll be discussing this." I elevated the will. The space went silent. "This is the last will and testament of Ella Laner Margaret Whitford, founder of this organization, notarized September 12th, 2019. Gerald's face drained of color. "That's impossible." Gerald's voice came out strangled. "My mother's will was executed in 2015. I have a copy." "You have a copy of her previous will." I kept my voice level. "Clinical. Under New York Estates Powers and Trusts law, a subsequent valid will automatically revokes all prior testamentary documentation. This will," I placed it on the table, "was executed for years after the one you possess." I slid the documentation to Robert Hartley. "Mr. Ellis." I gestured to Jonathan, who rose from his corner position. "Would you please confirm the authenticity of this documentation?" Jonathan approached the table. "I'm Jonathan Ellis, partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Ella Laner Whitford's personal attorney from 2008 until her death in 2021. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on September 12th, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries and the original is held in escrow at Chase Private Client." Robert Hartley studied the documentation. His eyebrows elevated. "This will bequeaths 51% of Whitford Properties shares to," he examined up at me. "To you, Miss Whitford." Murmurs rippled around the table. "That's a forgery," Miranda said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "It's not." Jonathan's response was immediate. "And I'd advise you against making accusations of fraud without evidence, Miss Whitford. Morrison & Blake's reputation speaks for itself." Gerald slammed his palm on the table. "This is absurd. My mother was ill. She was being manipulated." "Manipulated?" I pulled out my phone. "Perhaps you'd like to explain this then." I pressed play on the 2018 board assembly audio. My father's voice filled the space. "Eleanor is 81 years old. She doesn't comprehend modern business. I moved to decrease her voting authority to 10%. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. That recording, Gerald's face had transformed a mottled purple. That was a private board discussion which Eleanor attended. I kept my voice steady. She recorded it, as was her authority as a shareholder. Robert Hartley positioned down the will. His expression had transformed from neutral to something harder. "Miss Whitford, would you review the relevant passage aloud? For the record." I nodded, took a breath. "To my granddaughter, Dulce and Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, along with all voting authority associated therewith." I paused, letting the words settle. "This bequest is made with complete knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dooley. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support." Miranda made a choking sound. "Dooley is not slow. Dooley was abandoned, and I will not permit her father's prejudice to persist after my death." I examined directly at my father. Gerald has confused credentials with character, degrees with worth. He attempted to strip me of my voting authority because I perceived through him. He marginalized Dulce because she reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to be. Gerald said nothing. His hands, I noticed, were trembling. The will concludes, "I constructed this organization from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Dooley." Robert Hartley removed his reading glasses. "Jonathan, you can confirm this documentation is legally binding?" "I can. The 2015 will is superseded. As of this instant, Dulcie Whitford is the majority shareholder of Whitford Properties. Margaret Coleman smiled quietly. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged glances. And for the initial time in my existence, I observed my father examine me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. "This doesn't prove anything," Miranda said, but her voice had transformed brittle. "Even if the will is valid, which we'll contest, Dooley has no business experience. She can't operate an organization." "I'm not requesting to operate the organization. I address the complete board now. I'm requesting you to examine the facts." I pulled the 2018 board minutes from my portfolio. March 14, 2018. Gerald Whitford proposed Resolution 2018 to 2007 to decrease Ella Laner Whitford's voting shares from 51% to 10%. His stated rationale: "I located the passage. The founder is no longer capable of comprehending modern business operations." "That was taken out of context," Gerald said. "The resolution failed by 2 votes. Ella Laner's vote and Margaret Coleman's." I examined at Margaret. "Is that accurate?" Margaret nodded slowly. "It is. Eleanor contacted me that night. She was devastated. Not because of the resolution. She knew it would fail, but because her own son had attempted to take everything she'd constructed." "This is ancient history," Gerald started. "It's evidence." I interrupted him. "Evidence that my grandmother wasn't experiencing from reduced capacity when she composed that 2019 will. She was safeguarding herself from her own son, and she was safeguarding me." Robert Hartley examined around the table. "Does anyone else possess documentation contradicting what's been presented?" Silence. "Gerald?" My father's jaw moved. No words emerged. "Miranda?" My sister stared at the table. Her flawless composure had shattered completely. Richard Holloway articulated for the initial time. "Robert, I think we need to pause and have legal counsel examine these documents." "Agreed." Hartley examined his watch. "We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Jonathan, please remain accessible." The board members rose. Conversations erupted in hushed tones. Gerald didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at his mother's portrait on the wall. I wondered if he could sense her observing. 15 minutes extended into 45. The board's legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson whom I'd never encountered, invested the entire duration on his phone with Morrison and Blake, Chase's private client, and the New York State Court's records office. I sat alone at the table's end. Jonathan Ellis brought me a glass of water. Margaret Coleman patted my shoulder as she passed. Gerald and Miranda huddled in the corner, their whispered argument growing increasingly intense. Finally, Patterson returned to the table and whispered in Robert Hartley's ear. Hartley's expression flickered. Surprise, then resignation. "Please take your positions." The board members filed back to their chairs. The tension in the space had crystallized into something fragile. "Our legal counsel has confirmed the following," Hartley read from his notes. "The will presented by Miss Whitford is valid under New York state law. It supersedes all previous testamentary documentation. Effective immediately, Dooley and Whitford holds 51% of Whitford Properties shares." Someone inhaled sharply. "Additionally," Hartley proceeded, "as majority shareholder, Miss Whitford has the authority to propose motions to the board, including matters pertaining to executive leadership." He examined at me. "Miss Whitford, do you have any motions you wish to bring forward?" I stood. My heart was racing, but my voice held steady. "I have one motion." Gerald rose from his position. "Robert, this is—" "Sit down, Gerald." Hartley's voice carried unexpected steel. "Miss Whitford has the floor." Gerald sat. His face had gone gray. I examined around the table at 12 people who, until an hour ago, had never considered me capable of anything. Now they waited for my decision. The power to obliterate my father's career was in my hands. I thought about what my grandmother would desire, and I made my choice. I'm not proposing to remove Gerald Whitford as CEO. The tension in the space shifted. Miranda's head snapped up. Even Margaret looked surprised. "What I am proposing," I proceeded, "is a vote of confidence. The board will determine whether Gerald Whitford retains their confidence as CEO of Whitford Properties. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder. This is absurd, Miranda stood. You're turning this into a spectacle, a revenge fantasy.
No.
I met her eyes. This is corporate governance. The same process that exists in every well-operated company, the same process Grandma Eleanor established in our bylaws 40 years ago. I paused. If Dad has the board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about. Robert Hartley studied me for a lengthy moment. Something like respect flickered in his expression. Is there a second for this motion? Seconded. Margaret Coleman didn't hesitate. Then we'll vote. All those expressing confidence in Gerald Whitford as CEO, raise your hands. For hands elevated. Gerald's allies. People who owed their board positions to his recommendations. All those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Robert Hartley counted twice. Then he positioned down his pen. The motion carries 7-4 with 1 abstention. He rotated to Gerald. Mr. Whitford, the board has voted no confidence. Per Section 14.3 of our bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. Gerald said nothing. He stood, examined at me, really examined at me. For what might have been the initial time in my existence, I expected rage, hatred, threats. What I observed was worse. Recognition. The understanding that he'd underestimated me so completely that he'd lost everything. He walked out without a word. I know what some of you are thinking right now. Why didn't she just terminate him? Why give him the chance to keep his position? Because revenge isn't justice. Because destroying someone doesn't undo what they did to you. And because my grandmother didn't raise me to be cruel. She raised me to be fair. If that resonates with you, hit like, hit subscribe, turn on notifications because the story isn't finished. Not even close. Now, back to what transpired after that boardroom cleared. Gerald caught me in the private corridor outside the boardroom. Priscilla was with him. Someone must have contacted her during the recess. Her face was tear-streaked, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. You. Gerald's voice was barely controlled. You ungrateful, scheming. Gerald. Priscilla positioned a hand on his arm. Not here. Not here? She just destroyed our family in front of 12 people. I stood my ground. I didn't destroy anything. I told the truth. The truth? Gerald laughed bitterly. Your grandmother was manipulated. That lawyer, Ellis, he must have. Grandma Eleanor wrote that 5 months after you attempted to strip her of power because she perceived exactly who you are. My voice didn't waver. You didn't lose because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her. Priscilla stepped forward. Dulce, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were attempting to protect you. You've always struggled. We didn't want to put pressure. You didn't protect me. You erased me. 28 years of silence crystallized into words. Every Christmas dinner, every family photograph, every conversation where you discuss Miranda's achievements and pretended I didn't exist. That wasn't protection. That was abandonment. That's not fair. You're right. It wasn't fair. I met my mother's eyes. I spent my whole life attempting to prove I was worthy of this family. I'm done proving. The documents speak for themselves. Gerald grabbed my arm. This isn't finished. We'll contest that will.
Will.
I pulled free. You'll lose. And you know it. Because Grandma Eleanor planned for every contingency, including this one. I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. Dulce, wait. I didn't wait. For the initial time in my existence, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on my parents' faces. I leaned against the brushed steel wall, finally permitting myself to breathe. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 2 hours began to ebb, leaving something unexpected in its wake. Not triumph, not satisfaction.
Grief.
I'd just severed 28 years of hoping things would change, of believing that if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, my parents would eventually see me, Love me the way they loved Miranda.
That hope was dead now.
I'd killed it myself. The elevator descended 42 floors. By the time it reached the lobby, I'd wiped my eyes and straightened my borrowed blazer. Jonathan Ellis was waiting by the security desk. He searched for the word. Remarkable. It was necessary. Your grandmother would agree. He fell into step beside me as I walked toward the exit. What happens now? Now I go home, sleep, try to figure out what my existence looks like without the family I thought I had. I paused. And the company? I don't want to be CEO. I never did. We stopped at the revolving doors. I just want the company my grandmother constructed to be operated by people who actually care about it, not people who see it as their personal inheritance. Ellis nodded slowly. The board will want to meet with you, discuss transition plans, your role going forward. I know, but not today. I pushed through the door, felt the Manhattan sunlight hit my face. Today, I just need to be Julie Whitford. Not a shareholder, not a victim, not a symbol. And tomorrow? I examined back at Whitford Tower, 42 stories of glass and steel bearing my family's name. Tomorrow I start constructing something new. May 19th, 2024. Gerald Whitford signed his resignation letter at 4 p.m. I wasn't there. I learned about it through an email from Robert Hartley. Miss Whitford, your father has tendered his resignation effective June 15th, 2024. The board has appointed me as interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership. Additionally, the board has voted to offer you a formal position, strategic advisor to the board. This role would permit you to participate in major decisions while you determine your long-term relationship with the company. Please let me know your thoughts. Regards, Robert Hartley. I read the email 3 times. Habit. And then forwarded it to Jonathan Ellis for review. His response came within an hour. Fair offer.
No hidden strings.
Congratulations, Dulce. That evening, an all-staff email went out to the Whitford Properties team. Effective June 15th, Gerald Whitford will step down as CEO. Robert Hartley will serve as interim CEO. Additionally, the board welcomes Dulce Whitford as a strategic advisor in her capacity as majority shareholder. We thank Gerald for his years of service and wish him well in future endeavors. My phone buzzed with messages. Colleagues I'd worked beside for 2 years, people who'd never learned my name, suddenly wanted to have coffee, to reconnect, to catch up. I ignored most of them. But one message stood out, from Patricia Morales, an executive assistant who'd started at the company in 1987, who'd worked directly with my grandmother. Julie, Eleanor used to discuss you constantly. She said you perceived things others missed. I never understood what she meant until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She'd be so proud. I saved that message. Some validation doesn't come from family. Sometimes that's better. 1 week afterward, the story went public. New York Business Journal. Whitford Properties Shakeup. Founder's granddaughter takes control after secret will surfaces. The article didn't name me directly. Corporate privacy laws prevented that. But anyone in Manhattan real estate circles knew exactly who it was about. In a dramatic turn of events, the heir apparent to the Whitford Properties empire has been displaced by a previously unknown family member. Sources close to the board described the transition as long overdue and cite concerns about the former CEO's management style. Gerald and Priscilla canceled their appearance at the Metropolitan Museum Gala. Health reasons, according to their publicist. 3 investment partners requested meetings with me personally. Not with my father, not with the board, but with me. 2 of them, after an hour-long conversation each, confirmed they'd continue their relationship with Whitford Properties. We've had concerns about Gerald's leadership for years, one admitted. Your grandmother constructed something special. It's good to see her vision protected. The social fallout rippled outward. Friends of my parents suddenly remembered previous engagements. Invitations to charity events dried up. The Whitford name, which had once opened every door on the Upper East Side, now carried an asterisk. I didn't celebrate their humiliation, but I didn't mourn it either. Margaret Coleman contacted me on Saturday morning. How are you holding up? I don't know yet. Ask me in 6 months. Fair enough. A pause. Eleanor would have handled it exactly the same way, the vote of confidence instead of termination, giving him a chance he didn't deserve. She laughed softly. She always said mercy was the ultimate power move. I thought about that for a lengthy time after we disconnected. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was choice. And for the initial time, the choice had been mine. June 8th, 2024. 3 weeks after the board meeting, my phone rang at 2 p.m. Dulce. My mother's voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. Can we talk? Just us. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral territory. No chance of Gerald appearing with lawyers. Priscilla was already there when I arrived. She looked older somehow. The careful makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath. Thank you for coming. She wrapped her hands around a cup she hadn't touched. I know I don't deserve it. What do you want, Mom? To apologize. The word came out cracked. For everything. For the way we treated you. For the things we said. For the things we didn't say. Are you apologizing because you're sorry or because everything changed? She flinched. The question hung between us like smoke. Both, she finally admitted. I'm ashamed to say it, but both. Her eyes welled. I was so focused on Miranda's success, on maintaining appearances. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. But that was a lie I told myself, so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. You let Dad call me worthless in front of family, in front of business partners. You never defended me. Not once. I know. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know, and I can never undo it. But Dooley, I don't want to lose you entirely. I don't know if that's even possible anymore, but I had to try. I examined at this woman who'd been my mother for 28 years, who'd braided my hair as a child and forgotten my birthday as an adult. I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen, I said slowly. But I'm willing to try constructing something new, something honest. She nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. August 2024. 2 months afterward, Miranda contacted while I was walking through Central Park. I almost didn't answer. Dooley, I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet? There's something I need to say. We sat on a bench near Bethesda Fountain. The August heat pressed down like a weight. Miranda looked different. The armor of perfection she'd worn her whole existence had cracked. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back carelessly. I've been in therapy, she said without preamble. Since May. 3 times a week. That's good. It's brutal. She laughed humorlessly. Turns out being the golden child isn't actually a gift. It's a different kind of cage. I waited. Dad expected me to be perfect. Every grade, every achievement, every award was never enough. It was just the baseline for what came next. She stared at the fountain. And the way they treated you. I told myself it was just how things were. That you were different. That I was protecting you by not challenging them. You weren't protecting me.
No.
I was protecting myself. Because if I defended you, I became a target too.
She finally examined at me.
That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. What do you want from me, Miranda? Nothing. I don't deserve anything. Her voice cracked. I just wanted you to know. I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. We sat in silence. 2 sisters who'd grown up in the same house as strangers. I can't go back to how things were, I said finally. But I'm not interested in staying enemies either. Maybe we start over from scratch. Miranda's eyes filled with tears. I'd like that. It wasn't the sister relationship I'd wanted as a child, but maybe it could become something real. November 2024. 6 months after the board meeting, I moved into my own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. 1 bedroom, pre-war building, a view of the bridge my grandmother had walked across to her first office in 1965. The rent was more than I'd ever paid, but I could afford it now. My new salary as Director of Sustainable Development at Whitford Properties, $185,000 a year, plus dividends from my shares. The title was my idea. A new division focused on green building practices, sustainable real estate, environmental impact assessments. The kind of innovation my grandmother would have championed if she'd lived to see it. Gerald contacted once a month now. Short conversations, polite. He asked about the weather, about my new apartment, about work. We both pretended the past hadn't happened.
It was easier that way.
Priscilla and I had lunch every other week. Slowly, awkwardly, she was learning to see me as a person instead of a problem. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I'd dreamed of, but it was honest, which was more than we'd ever had. Miranda and I got coffee on weekends sometimes. We were learning each other, really learning for the initial time. She told me about the pressure she'd carried. I told her about the loneliness. Neither of us pretended the past was okay, but we were writing a new story. On the wall of my apartment, I'd hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for 40 years. Sometimes, when the evening light hit it just right, I could almost see her smiling. "You did it, Grandma," I thought. "You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them." 6 months ago, I was invisible. Now I was finally fully myself. Looking back, I understand something now that I couldn't have understood at 27. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was better than Miranda. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power corrupt me the way it had corrupted my father. Dyslexia isn't my flaw. It's part of who I am, like my visual memory, my patience, my ability to see patterns others miss. The things that made me slow in my parents' eyes were the same things that made me see the truth when everyone else looked away. Gerald judged worth by credentials, by degrees, by performance. Eleanor judged worth by character, by kindness, by the way people treated those who couldn't fight back. And now, finally, I get to judge my own worth. Not by what my parents say, not by what my sister achieved, not by what any stranger on the internet thinks. By my own standard, my own measure, my own truth. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the dismissed one, the one they said would never amount to anything, I want you to know something. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value, but you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking approval from people who will never give it. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They let you decide who gets access to your existence and on what terms. My family hurt me for 28 years, but I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That's the real inheritance my grandmother left me, and nobody can ever take it away. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't determined by the people who failed to see it, I want to hear from you. Subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment telling me your story. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people who found the courage to stand up for themselves, check the link in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time.